Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today we have a monumental stack of material to get through.
It's a big one.
A really big one. We're talking about a philosophical reckoning with the 21st century, specifically with the way we learn, the way we think we learn.
Right. And our goal today is to take these incredibly dense, sometimes really formal sources you've sent us and turn them into something, actionable, insightful knowledge you can actually use.
Okay, so let's set the mission here. We're analyzing a whole range of modern threats to, I guess, rational thought.
That's the core of it. We're looking at things like AI creating what one source calls cognitive casts.
And the other big one, the deep entrenchment of echo chambers.
Exactly. And our job is not just to point out the problems. We're here to reconstruct the philosophical blueprint for fighting back.
A blueprint for what the sources are calling the cultivation of productive friction.
Yes, all in the service of maintaining something called epistemic sovereignty.
Owning your own thoughts.
Owning your own thoughts in the process of getting there. It's a huge topic.
It is. Okay, so before we dive in, can you give us the executive thesis, the one-sentence summary for this entire deep dive?
I can try. It's a mouthful, but here it is. The central challenge to democratic legitimacy and moral progress in the algorithmic age is the structural amplification of detrimental epistemic friction.
Okay, things like silencing, prejudice.
Algorithmic pacification,
Yeah.
right? And all of this stratifies society into these cognitive castes, which makes cultivating rational self-governance and respectful dissent an urgent political necessity.
Wow. That is a huge, huge claim. It immediately sets the stakes incredibly high.
It does.
This isn't just about misinformation on social media. You're saying this strikes at the very structure of democracy itself.
I think that's what the sources are arguing, yes. The core context, the problem we're trying to solve here, is really one of persistence.
Persistence of what?
Persistence of knowledge, of truth, of genuine democratic agency. How do these things survive when algorithmic systems and, those perfectly tailored echo chambers are mediating almost all of our reality?
Right. It feels like we're all seeing a different world through our phones.
We are. And that directly challenges the whole Enlightenment era idea of the autonomous, rational citizen who can engage in liberal deliberation.
The person who could read a pamphlet, think about it, and then go vote.
Exactly. That person is under assault because the technological system, by optimizing for our comfort, is fundamentally breaking the contract of self-governance. It's making it too easy not to think.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute foundational concept for this entire analysis. Epistemic friction. It sounds kind of clinical.
It does, but it describes a feeling that I think every single one of us experiences, probably multiple times a day.
That feeling of your brain hitting a wall.
That's the perfect way to put it. Epistemic friction is defined as the inherent difficulty or resistance you encounter when new information or, a different viewpoint challenges your established beliefs.
It's the intellectual pushback.
It's the pushback.
Yeah.
And the word itself, the etymology, is really helpful here.
Where does it come from?
Well, you have episteme from Greek, which means knowledge or understanding.
Okay.
And then you have frictio from Latin, which just means rubbing a conflict.
So knowledge conflict.
Exactly. The term is designed to capture that direct clash when two bodies of knowledge interact. It's that moment. A new piece of data just doesn't fit your worldview, and your mind sort of freezes up for a second.
And internally, that clash, it's stressful. The sources link it directly to cognitive dissonance.
That's the psychological trigger. Cognitive dissonance is that state of stress that really acts as the internal spark for the friction. It's that awful feeling you get when you're holding two conflicting ideas at the same time.
Like when you admire someone and then find out they did something terrible.
A perfect example. Your mind just desperately seeks coherence. It wants to resolve that tension. And the effort required to genuinely change your mind on something you deeply believe, that psychological heat you feel, that is epistemic friction in action.
And if you don't manage it, you just shut down.
You shut down. The resistance wins, and the new idea gets rejected before it's ever really considered. It can stop consensus building dead in its tracks.
But, and this is the core insight of this whole stack of texts, friction isn't inherently bad.
Not at all. In fact, some friction is not only necessary, it's highly productive. This is the duality we have to get comfortable with.
So how do we tell the difference? How do we know if this struggle is good for us or bad for us?
The philosophical distinction hinges on one single goal, which the sources call veridicality.
Veridicality, a new one for me.
It's a technical term, but it just means compliance with the standard of truth. Does it correspond to objective reality? If the resistance, the friction, is moving you closer to reality, it's good. If it's pushing you away, it's bad.
So productive friction is like an intellectual workout, resistance training for your brain.
That is a very, very useful analogy. Productive friction is defined by things like contestation, dissent, rigorous revision,
Yeah.
steadfast inquiry.
It's the hard work.
It is the hard work. It actively compels you, the epistemic agent, closer to reality. And the result is a deeper comprehension. You only truly understand something when you've had to struggle with it or defend it against a serious challenge.
And then there's the other side of the coin, detrimental friction.
Right. And this is when the resistance isn't aimed at improving the belief, but at protecting the belief system itself, no matter the evidence.
It's intellectual tribalism.
That's a good way to frame it. It's defined by things like systemic silencing, negative prejudice, what the text calls algorithmic insulation.
And just active, conscious resistance to facts.
Exactly. It prevents you from aligning with reality. It leads to dogmatism, stagnation, and ultimately something we'll talk about a lot, epistemic injustice.
The sources use the example of deep-seated climate skepticism here.
They do, because it's a clear case. The resistance you see there often isn't a constructive disagreement over, say, data analysis methods. It's a more fundamental failure mode, where friction is deployed to actively reject objective standards of evidence.
All to protect a certain worldview or a certain economic status quo.
Precisely. The resistance isn't aimed at finding the truth. It's aimed at protecting a comfortable, pre-existing social position.
And this distinction, productive versus detrimental, it's not just for personal learning. It's absolutely critical for political life.
This is where the pragmatist philosopher John Dewey comes in.
Right. His work is championed by scholars like Jose Medina and Elizabeth Anderson.
Yes, and they highlight his very specific experimentalist account of democracy. Dewey's view was that democracy is the only regime structurally designed to render conflict epistemically productive.
That is a powerful idea. Most systems try to minimize conflict.
Right. Monarchies, dictatorships, they want harmony and obedience. But Dewey says democracy, when it's working, actually maximizes productive conflict. It uses disagreement to generate truth.
So in a healthy democracy, dissent isn't just a civil right you tolerate. It's structurally valuable. It's the engine.
It's the engine of democratic knowledge. The political process, if it's functioning correctly, uses disagreement to refine policy, to test ideas against a diversity of interests and experiences.
Which means if we want to solve our complex modern problems, whether in government or in, say, a company,
our structures have to be engineered to actively solicit and reward dissent, not suppress it. Yeah. If you can't challenge an idea within a structure, that idea can't be tested for truth, and it will eventually, inevitably, lead to institutional failure. We need this friction in our lives.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And it leads us right into the formal structures and the precise language we need to really dissect the political consequences of losing that necessary friction.
To really grasp the precision of this philosophy, we have to talk about the language. The sources you shared, especially the work on cognitive castes, are, well, they're rigorously formal. They use philosophical jargon and even predicate logic.
Right, and that can be a bit intimidating. But the authors argue that this clarity is vital, right? Because imprecise language lets these digital harms hide in plain sight.
It does. Let's start with the core concept we're trying to protect. What is it that's under threat? It's what the authors call epistemic sovereignty.
Okay, epistemic sovereignty. Breaking that down, it sounds like self-ownership of your knowledge.
That's exactly it. The sources define it as inseparable from epistemic self-ownership. It requires two things. Procedural agency.
So you have to be in control of the process of knowing.
Yes. And the second thing is the absence of delegated cognition.
You can't just outsource your thinking to a machine or a mob and still be sovereign.
Precisely. And the threat to this sovereignty is laid out in a formal argument for what's called cognitive dependency.
This is where the text brings in the predicate logic, the symbols.
It is. And look, we don't need to get lost in the symbols, but we have to understand the structural inevitability that the symbols represent. It's a way of showing this isn't just an opinion, it's a logical conclusion.
Okay, so let's walk through the argument for cognitive dependency. It's basically formalizing the claim that without a specific kind of knowledge, you can't be independent when you're using AI.
Correct. The logic identifies a few key elements. Let's simplify the variables for everyone listening. Let's say K stands for having critical rational knowledge.
The ability to think for yourself, basically.
Yes. Then D is the capacity for independent discernment, being able to tell truth from falsehood on your own.
Got it.
And A is just interacting with an AI interface, which is pretty much all of us now.
Okay, so the first premise, P1, what's the starting point?
The first premise, P1, establishes the gold standard. It says rational knowledge implies discernment. In simple terms, all agents who possess critical rational knowledge are capable of independent discernment of truth claims.
That seems almost obvious, but I guess you have to state it. True knowledge requires independence.
You have to state it, because P2, the second premise, introduces the modern complication.
Which is us, the user.
Right. P2 is what's called an existence claim. It says there exist agents who interact with AI interfaces, yet lack that critical rational knowledge.
So there are people out there, lots of them, using AI without really understanding how it works.
That's the vast majority of us. We use these incredibly sophisticated systems without understanding their underlying statistical models or procedural mechanisms. We're using the tool, but we don't know how the tool is thinking.
Okay, so we have P1, the ideal, and P2, the reality. The conclusion, then, is drawn by connecting those two.
That's the logical hammer. The inferred conclusion is powerful and, frankly, a bit bleak. Agents who interact with AI interfaces but lack critical rational knowledge are incapable of independent discernment of truth claims.
And therefore,
They're in a relationship of rational dependency.
wait, let me stop you there. So the formal logic dictates that if you use these powerful systems without that critical rational knowledge, you are inherently dependent. That seems harsh.
It does seem harsh.
I mean, where's the line between dependency and convenience? I use GPS. Am I rationally dependent?
That is the essential critical question. And the authors would argue that the line is drawn at delegated cognition. Convenience is asking Google Maps the fastest way to the coffee shop. Dependency, the loss of sovereignty, is accepting that route without the capacity to check its logic, to question its potential biases, or to detect if it's secretly optimizing for something else.
Like driving me past a sponsored business.
Exactly.
So
Or
that-
keeping you on the road longer to increase engagement time. The logic states that if you cannot interrogate the system's output, if you lack K, critical knowledge, you cannot perform a D, discernment, and therefore you are, by definition, rationally dependent.
So the very act of using these tools without the intellectual scaffolding to question them traps us in this dependency relationship. And this is the mechanism that creates the cognitive casts.
That's the mechanism. But before we move fully into that, let's just lock in two more key terms we're going to be using.
Go ahead.
The first is algorithmic pacification. This is described as a dual logic. On one hand, you have interface pacification making things super easy to use.
The frictionless experience.
Right. And on the other hand, algorithmic privilege. The system lowers the cognitive demand for most users while simultaneously raising the threshold for true epistemic agency. It replaces your reflection with its suggestion.
So it makes it easy to be a serf and much, much harder to be a sovereign.
You've got it. And the second term we need is epistemic harm. This is the resulting degradation of a person's status as a knower. We'll come back to this in detail, but it's crucial to see this as a distinct, real type of injury.
Okay. So that logically necessary dependence brings us straight to the first of the twin threats, the creation of cognitive casts.
Right. The argument is that AI isn't just reorganizing information for us, it's fundamentally reorganizing political agency.
Tell us more about the stratification. It sounds like AI is codifying a new kind of social hierarchy, an informational aristocracy.
That's the term one of the sources uses, yes. And the argument is we are already living under this system. On one side, you have a small minority, the cognitive elites.
Who are these people?
They're the individuals equipped with formal logical training, recursive thinking habits, adversarial epistemic models. They're the ones who can use AI as an amplifier of their existing cognitive capital.
They understand the black box. They know how to prompt it effectively, how to challenge it.
And crucially, they know how to test its output against external reality and logical consistency. They are the sovereigns.
And the majority of us.
The majority become the informational serfs.
That's a stark phrase.
It is. They are the agents from our logical argument, the ones who lack the resources or the time or the specialized training for independent analytical capacity. They become passive consumers of what the sources label belief as a service.
Belief is a service. So you're not just subscribing to a platform, you're subscribing to a prepackaged way of thinking.
Exactly. Your agency becomes entirely contingent, shaped by the incentives of systems you can't see and can't control. This is that algorithmic pacification in action. The interfaces are designed to be smooth, easy, frictionless, removing the need for deep thought and replacing it with a simple suggestion.
That distinction you mentioned earlier between governance and guidance feels really important here. It's chilling, actually.
It's the core of the political erosion. When these AI systems are determining what's visible, what's believable, what gets prioritized, the line between self-governance and just being guided by an automated system, it collapses.
So political life is no longer about debate and argument.
The argument is that it's shifting. It's less about contestation and deliberation, which are inherently messy, frictional processes. And it's becoming more about compliance with algorithmically curated norms.
Wow.
And the sources state this explicitly. A functional democracy cannot survive when its epistemology, its theory of how we know things, is a black box. The ability to interpret the reasoning of the system, that's the new literacy required for self-governance.
Okay, so that's the first major threat, this technologically induced passivity. The other huge threat comes from our social structures, the echo chamber.
Yes, and the threat of the echo chamber is existential because it structurally prevents the very thing Dewey said democracy needs, productive conflict.
So let's get the formal definition. What makes an echo chamber different from just, a group of friends who all agree?
The key difference is that an echo chamber is a social epistemic structure where outsiders, people with different views, are actively and systematically discredited.
So it's not just that you don't hear them, it's that you're taught not to trust them before they even speak.
Precisely. And this makes meaningful conversation and, crucially, what the sources call conflictive social reasoning, completely impossible.
Why is that conflictive reasoning so vital for moral progress or even just intellectual progress?
Because of the inherent flaws in how individual humans reason. Our minds are plagued by two big problems. The sources name them as otiosity and bias.
Otiosity, what does that mean?
Otiosity is the tendency to use your reasoning abilities only to justify your pre-existing judgments. It's a post hoc rationalization engine. You don't reason to find the truth. You reason to prove you were right all along.
You're using your intellect as a defense lawyer for your gut feelings.
A perfect metaphor. And the conflictive social reasoning thesis asserts that the only effective antidote to this, and to our other biases, is accountability.
And you can only get that from people who disagree with you.
Exactly. Effective moral reasoning requires you to reason as a group, engaging with people who will call you out, who will hold your biased reasoning accountable. If you only ever reason with people who agree with you, you just confirm and amplify what you already think. You cement your bias.
So the echo chamber functions as a kind of intellectual or moral inoculation.
It inoculates you against change. Members are protected from changing their moral or political judgments, even when they see opposing evidence, because the chamber has already given them a pre-made toolkit for discrediting that evidence.
Which is so harmful, because if the chamber is echoing regressive or prejudiced or just false views, it makes those members totally resistant to correction.
It impedes progress for the entire society.
The sources have this really vivid and pretty disturbing case study about the social media platform Gab and the events around January 6th.
Yes, and this case is vital because it shows that echo chambers are not just spaces of omission where you simply don't encounter other views. That would be more like an epistemic bubble.
This is more active, more aggressive.
It's a space of active discreditation. A core strategy that entrenches the echo chamber is discrediting outsiders, the mainstream media, the scientific establishment, the globalist elites.
And what's truly insidious is how users can take a conflicting source, say an article from the New York Times, and use it to affirm their existing bias.
That's exactly what the case study shows.
Yeah.
A Gab user posted a critical article from a mainstream outlet about extremist rhetoric. But instead of engaging with the article's actual point, the user and the commenters just rejected the credibility of the source entirely.
So the article became evidence of their conspiracy.
It was leveraged as proof of anti-white corporate parasites or globalist lies. The source of potential productive friction, the conflicting article, became a disagreement reinforcement mechanism inside the chamber.
The outside voices aren't just filtered out. They're brought in, reframed, and used as fuel for the fire.
Exactly. It makes meaningful, productive conflict impossible because exclusion and resistance to evidence become institutionally entrenched. It's a closed loop.
Okay, so if the core problem is that our technology and our social structures are optimizing for comfort and control, for removing that productive friction, then the solution has to be about designing that resistance back in.
Back into our individual habits and back into our organizational structures. And this brings us back to that formal philosophical definition of what it means to be an autonomous individual.
Right. This was the crux paragraph from the text on cognitive castes. It was dense, but you said it was essential.
It is because it's not a vague suggestion. It's a procedure. It's a set of steps for maintaining epistemic sovereignty. I'll read the formal quote again. Autonomous landa make the certami si chames the text valid blind acceptance.
All right, that's the formula for self-ownership. Let's break down those 3 continuous recursive steps. This is what you, the listener, need to be doing every single time you encounter a piece of information.
Okay, so this formula means that autonomy is defined not by your access to information, which is cheap and abundant now. It's defined by your persistent, rigorous scrutiny. A citizen, C, is autonomous if and only if they apply these 3 steps to every informational input, X.
Step 1.
First, you must interrogate. This means actively questioning the source, the underlying claims, the assumptions, the incentives of whoever is telling you this. You have to ask, why am I seeing this now? Who benefits if I believe this?
Second is validation.
This is the external check. You have to check the claims against outside evidence and logical consistency. If it's a statistic, do the numbers actually add up? If it's a story, does it align with other things you know to be true about the world?
This is where adversarial reasoning comes in. You have to deliberately try to prove the claim wrong.
You have to. And the third step, which is the most critical for fighting that algorithmic pacification we talked about, is the rejection of blind acceptance.
You can't just passively consume.
You cannot. The agent must consciously refuse to delegate their judgment to the system or the platform. The sources are explicit. Passive consumption disqualifies agency. Autonomy is a verb. It's an active, ongoing process, not a state of being.
The analogy of the GPS user versus the expert navigator really makes this clear for me.
It's a perfect contrast. Think of the typical user, the naive agent. They are the delegated cognizer. They just accept the GPS route, the ETA, the terms, without question.
They trust the machine.
They trust it implicitly. That is delegated cognition. The system is doing the thinking for them, making them rationally dependent.
Whereas the autonomous agent, the expert navigator, doesn't throw out the GPS. They use it differently.
Exactly. The expert navigator uses it as a tool, a starting point for their own judgment. They check the GPS against external facts, they look at the traffic, they remember that road is always closed at this time of day, they question the path, they have the capacity for adversarial reasoning.
So that active scrutiny, that habit of interrogate and validate, is the only thing that guarantees sovereignty in the age of AI.
It's the only thing.
Yeah.
But it's not just about logic and technical skill. The philosophical response also demands that we cultivate individual epistemic virtues.
And critically, that we learn to manage our emotions around difficult learning. What the sources called effective regulation.
Yes, this is where the human element comes roaring back in. Our ability to move away from deep-seated prejudices, which are a major cause of epistemic injustice, depends on these moments of acute self-critical awareness, of managing our own cognitive dissonance.
You have to recognize that your first biased instinct might be wrong and have the virtue to correct it.
And we have to work on 2 different psychological levels to make that happen. A conscious System 2 level and a deeper, more automatic System 1 level.
So the argument is for a multi-directional orientation of virtue. What does that mean?
It means we have to direct our scrutiny both inward, at our own biases and micro-interactions, and outward, at the macro structures that either support or undermine reliable knowledge. But to do that, psychologically, we need both systems working.
Okay, so first, the metacognitive dispositions, or System 2.
Right. These are your self-reflective, conscious, corrective abilities. This is you consciously pausing and recognizing, for example, that a negative prejudice is causing you to unjustly lower your credibility estimate for someone. It's correcting your own flawed judgment after you've had the thought.
And the second level is direct retraining of System 1.
This is the deeper work. This is about cultivating spontaneous, unreflective patterns of thinking and feeling that neutralize the effects of prejudice before your conscious mind even has to get involved.
It's like training your gut instinct to be more just, so you don't need System 2 to clean up the mess as often.
You're internalizing the virtue.
Yeah.
And the importance of this kind of internal struggle, this retraining, is actually borne out in other fields. There's fantastic research on engineering students solving these incredibly complex, ill-defined problems.
Right, the open-ended modeling problems, or OEMPs, these are designed specifically to generate high levels of productive friction.
Exactly. And the study reveals this fascinating emotional journey the students go on.
What happens?
Well, initially, they face intense negative affect. They're confronted with total ambiguity, no clear solution path. The study recorded their emotional expressions, and the highest counts were for confused 10 times and frustrated 8 times.
And the goal isn't to get rid of that frustration.
No, because that struggle is where the deep learning happens. The goal is to help the students practice effective regulation.
To learn how to use that stressful, confused state as a driver for new strategies.
Precisely. They learn to associate those negative feelings not with failure, but with the necessary steps toward a breakthrough. There's this great quote from a student named Lane.
What did he say?
He says, "But if I do this, if I walk away, if I come back, if I just start the problem completely over, putting all of those attempts together will get me to my final idea." He learned that the struggle is the process.
He's building resilience. He's creating a psychological system that understands, okay, I feel confused and frustrated. That must mean I'm on the verge of figuring this out.
It's the institutionalization of productive friction in his own mind. Another student, Christina, talks about the game in self-trust. She said, "As long as I was confident and followed what I knew was the principles, I would be okay." The struggle built her identity as a problem solver. She gained epistemic sovereignty over that domain.
So if that's the individual practice, how do we scale that up? How do we institutionalize that struggle at an organizational or political level?
We transition from individual virtue to organizational necessity. We have to demand respectful dissent.
To avoid what the sources call violent agreement.
Yes, that fierce head nodding in a meeting that just masks what people are really thinking because they're afraid of reprisal. That's an organizational echo chamber, and it kills quality.
So how do we make sure the conflict is respectful and actually productive?
The guiding rule from the corporate sources is crucial. Argue like you're right and listen like you're wrong.
More elephant, less hippo.
More elephant, big ears, less hippo, big mouth. It means you have to be forceful in presenting your view. You have to generate that necessary friction, but you also have to be deeply, genuinely open to being proven wrong.
Which requires leaders and systems that actively solicit feedback from all directions, 360-degree listening.
Absolutely. But for any of this to work, there's one prerequisite: leadership security. Leaders have to be secure enough that they don't see disagreement as a personal threat.
And the organization has to protect the dissenters.
It must. It has to ensure that individuals who take the risk to speak up are supported, not left overexposed and vulnerable to grave repercussions. If you punish dissent, you just reinforce detrimental friction and silence.
The ultimate goal, then, is cognitive diversity. It's necessary to solve complex problems, even if it feels uncomfortable. We have to optimize for truth, not for harmony.
Exactly. And this brings us back full circle to the societal dimension of all this, to epistemic harm.
Right. This concept is the key to arguing for real structural, maybe even legal change, because it finally puts a name to an injury that has been invisible for so long.
It's often the initial invisible injury that comes before the more recognizable harms, the financial loss, the physical damage. Let's use that powerful example from the source, the case of Mrs. Miller.
Okay, remind us of the details.
Mrs. Miller was a 39-year-old black woman who was in the hospital to give birth. For over 10 hours, she repeatedly complained of severe pain and discomfort. Her physician, a Dr. Smith, repeatedly ignored her testimony.
Operating under biases, whether conscious or unconscious.
That perhaps black patients could endure more pain, or that her testimony was simply less credible. And as a result, she suffered a debilitating stroke.
The doctor's actions clearly caused massive physical and financial harm. But the first injury, the originating one, was the epistemic harm.
That is the core of the injustice. Epistemic harm is the degradation of a person's status as a knower. The doctor rejected Mrs. Miller's ability to give accurate knowledge about her own body, her own suffering.
To be harmed in that way is a profound humiliation.
It is.
Yeah.
It's to be treated not as someone whose knowledge matters, but as something whose symptoms can be dismissed because of prejudice.
And the legal injustice is that the system is set up to compensate for the stroke, the physical harm, but it often completely fails to recognize or compensate for that originating epistemic harm.
Exactly. Mrs. Miller's epistemic harm resulted directly from testimonial injustice. And just to recap our definitions, this has 3 parts. 1, there's a negative identity prejudice. Dr. Smith was prejudiced against Mrs. Miller's identity. 2, this leads to an unjustified credibility deficit. He gave her less credibility than she was due.
And 3, that leads to the epistemic harm.
Her knowledge was dismissed, which led directly to the physical catastrophe. If he had simply respected her standing as a knower and listened to her, the stroke likely never would have happened.
So what's the path to getting this recognized legally?
The sources outline a 3-step social process: naming, dissemination, and acceptance.
Naming is done. Philosophers have given us the language.
Yes. The next and hardest step is dissemination. This needs a broad social awakening, a viral aha moment. Think of how the hashtag #MeToo movement forced a societal reckoning on long-ignored patterns of injustice.
And after society accepts it, the legal system can follow.
That's the hope, that courts will finally recognize epistemic harm as a legally cognizable civil wrong, an injury that judges have the authority to remedy. This would be a fundamental change in how we view the legal duty of care.
You'd be expanding it from just avoiding physical outcomes to include a duty to respect a patient's standing as a knower.
Precisely. And this wouldn't just change medical ethics. Think about police interactions, educational structures, even the design of algorithms. Remedying this harm is the ultimate goal of achieving full epistemic justice.
So, shifting from legal remedies to other institutional ones, how can we strengthen the bond between science and society to promote this kind of fairness? The sources point to citizen science.
Yes, citizen science holds enormous democratic potential.
Yeah.
But only if it's structured in a way that fosters productive friction and justice. It can't just be about citizens acting as passive data collectors for scientists.
So they have to be involved in the discussions about the research goals, the ethics?
They have to be. The sources refer to the idea of deliberative systems and argue that for citizen science to be a healthy part of that system, it has to fulfill three basic functions.
What are they?
First is the epistemic function. It has to actually process complex information and generate reliable knowledge. That's where the friction happens. The ethical function. It has to actively promote mutual respect between all participants, lay citizens, and professional scientists, which directly counters testimonial injustice.
And third, the democratic function.
It has to ensure the inclusion of diverse interests and concerns that might otherwise be marginalized by purely expert-driven research.
So if it achieves these three things, citizen science can promote epistemic justice in science. It can avoid violating people's standing as knowers within the scientific process itself.
And that's vital in an era of rampant anti-science movements and eroding trust. It can help make the scientific process more transparent and participatory, but the sources also urge a bit of caution.
Realistic expectations.
We have to have realistic expectations. Citizen science is a powerful strategy, but it's just one element in a much larger, more complex, deliberative system. It's not a magic wand. It has to be paired with everything else we've discussed. The individual virtue, the adversarial reasoning, the institutional dissent.
What an incredible deep dive into, really, the cost of convenience. We started by defining the two faces of resistance, epistemic friction, and establishing that productive struggle is the very foundation of genuine knowledge.
Then we looked at the profound threat of detrimental friction, which shows up as cognitive casts where AI systems promote our rational dependency, and echo chambers where that necessary conflictive reasoning is systematically destroyed.
And we established the counter strategies, the formal procedural requirement for autonomy to interrogate, validate, and reject blind acceptance.
Right. And the essential need to cultivate that multidirectional epistemic virtue through both conscious metacognition and direct effective retraining, like we saw with the engineering students.
And finally, the institutional imperative for respectful dissent that requires us all to argue like we're right, but listen like we're wrong.
I think the core knowledge we've gained today is that the pursuit of truth is not meant to be frictionless. It's an inherently difficult, uncomfortable, emotional, and adversarial process.
And we are constantly making a choice between the easy path of passive consumption, of outsourcing our cognition, and the hard path of procedural scrutiny, of actually owning our beliefs.
And that leads, I think, to the most profound insight across all of these sources. Knowledge isn't a commodity to be consumed or a suggestion to be blindly accepted. It's a skill. And it's a skill defined by the willingness to struggle and endure resistance.
And we're currently outsourcing that cognitive labor.
We are, to systems optimized for control, like AI, or for comfort, like echo chambers. So the final question for you, the learner, isn't just what do you know, it's what cognitive price are you willing to pay to truly own your beliefs?
Wow.
That willingness to endure the necessary struggle, to generate that productive friction both inside yourself and with others. That is the true cost of epistemic sovereignty.
A perfect question to end on. If you want to explore this further, a good place to start is researching adversarial reasoning and the political philosophy of procedural autonomy. Thank you so much for sharing your sources with us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
We'll talk again soon.